Kanishka joined us here working on natural language, and I would not just natural language processing, but just natural language. And what is language comes from linguistics and the cognitive science background. And as your research faculty here, I'm sure will be very happy to talk to you about many things related to cognitive science and natural language. But today, if you have a little language model at home that you're trying to raise, then I guess we'll hear how to do that.
That's a very creative way of describing almost exactly how it will be. Yeah, thanks, Nati. Cool. All right. So thanks everyone for joining. Yeah, I'm excited to present some new line of work that I've been pursuing. So last year I had the privilege of visiting TTI and present my PhD work. This year I'm presenting my postdoc work, and hopefully this will continue on to my work that I do here. So the title of my talk is Controlled Rearing of Language Models Can Reveal Linguistic Insight That May also be transformed into a may, but well, it's always nice to have skepticism, so let's assume that it's both. All right, so I'm very fascinated by the computer vision talks where they start with an image. It's very, very nice to look at image, and there's lots of intricacies there. And so analogously, I'm going to start with what is the analog of image for us, which is just sentences. And so if you read the sentence, happy though we were with the idea, we did not pursue it. And native English speakers at least can tell us that this is perfectly grammatical. They will probably use it in their lifetime. Similarly, a more complicated version of the same analogous shared structure in that sentence is in the second sentence, clean as you think your hands are. They usually have dirt and bacteria from items you've touched, so a reminder for people to wash hands all the time. So both these sentences are grammatical, at least to native speakers, even though the second one is slightly more complicated. And so people have studied these sentences. So linguists have studied these sentences. Computational linguists have studied these sentences. The interesting thing about both these sentences is that they're very rare. So they're called the happy though we were with the idea. So blank though we were or we are, though we thought we were. They're called this complicated. They have the complicated name preposing in PP construction, which I like to say, and Chris like to say, PIPS, P-I-P-P-S. And so the interesting thing about these sentences is that they're extremely rare. So the first version is estimated to occur about 0.03% in free text. And the second one, which is slightly more complicated, and the reason it's complicated is because there's a finite clause in the middle. So as you think, so you think your hands are, which is slightly different from the happy though we were with the idea. So the pronoun is directly after though. But there are like two mentions. But regardless of that, the second one is so rare that it was like Chris Potts counted 58 occurrences out of 7.6 billion. Currently using some sophisticated classifier and sort of some manual estimation.
So sorry, when you say these are like 0.03 or 78, what is the template you're trying to choose? This template appears so rarely, or there's like a specific special case grammatical rule that you only have to that you have to use only for like 58 of 7 billion examples?
Yeah. So what is interesting here is that usually you would say though we were happy with the idea. So the interesting thing is that happy moves to the beginning, and so that makes it kind of rare.
But what I'm just trying to understand is that like. It's not presumably you're not saying that this sentence appears 0.03.
No. The pattern of this blank though we were, the template essentially, blank though we were, or blank as we were.
Okay.
Yeah. So that happy can be sad as well.
But I'm curious though, does this follow, maybe, sorry if I'm jumping the gun.
No problem.
Does this follow, if I open like an English grammar book, then did this follow, is this actually legitimate under, some, if somebody wrote a formal definition of English grammar,
right.
Then would this be allowed? Or does this need, and it not with a special rule that only is used, it's not that there's some special derivation that only used 0.03% of the time. It's allowed with standard derivations.
Yes, it's a perfectly normal sentence, but this sort of pattern occurs only 0.03% of the time.
Okay.
Yeah, so both these, sort of the rarity of this construction presents a predicament for two kinds of learners I'm concerned with. So humans and language models. And so when they're both presented the PIPP construction, they both, using various ways and means of measuring grammaticality, they both assume or show behavior that suggests that this construction is grammatical. And the predicament is that it's so rare, and yet they are able to show sort of perfectly normal behavior on this construction. The question is, how do they do this? How do these generalizations emerge? In the context of humans, we can only form theories, but we cannot really sort of provide proper valid proofs or any empirical sort of research because you can't access the training data of a human. In the context of language models, we can sort of wonder or have some competing questions about are they just memorizing this verbatim? So like things like ChatGPT, it's equally impossible to look at their training data. Maybe only OpenAI can actually look at it. And so the question is, are they just simply spitting out exactly what they've seen? And is that why they say this is grammatical? Or are they actually doing some kind of generalization? So this question has been studied by many various people in CompLang and NLP. So this is one of my favorite papers to motivate this example. So they wanted to study, so Tom McCoy was interning at Microsoft, and they had special access to the GPT-2 training corpus, which none of us do. And so they ran this meticulous study of how does GPT-2, does it generalize beyond its training experience? And there's contemporary work that shows that language models are capable of extensive memorization. They can spit out a fact that they've seen in the training data almost exactly. And so what they did was they actually set out to test this. And what they did was they compared the test set, presumably that will also contain some novel utterances, and they compared the generations from the GPT-2 XL model. And what they looked at was the n-gram overlap. So n-gram would be like for this title, a bigram would be how much do language, things like that. And so as the n-gram size went up, the models were actually producing n-grams that were more novel than the novel n-grams in the test set.
So what's the change to novel here?
Sorry?
What does novel here mean?
Novel here means that those n-grams have not occurred in the training data. So the test set will have some amount of novelty, hopefully, if it's a good test set. And the model's generation had sort of n-grams that were not present in the training data more often than the test data itself.
I see. So the red line is just a statement about the difference in the test and the training data.
Yeah.
And what are you doing here? What's the GPT-2? You just ask GPT to generate a bunch of text, or is it like?
Yeah, you prime it with one like sort of beginning of sentence token and let it and then use a sample from its output distribution and keep sampling. So this is a great work, and it showed some amount of novelty in the model's generalizations. They even showed novel coinages by GPT-2 XL. So GPT-2 XL literally coined words that were not present in the training data, like Brazilianisms was one of my favorite ones, Torpexes, Sally-themed, etc. Etc. is probably not part of the and then not just novel coinages, but for the novel coinages, they agreed with the grammatical rules of number. So if you have a word that ends with a S, so Fauleses, I'm assuming that's a surname, and so you use the apostrophe and not the S to say the possession. Similarly, Brazilianisms is plural, assuming that is actually novel, then they have to infer that it's actually plural, and they generated text that agreed with the plurality of Brazilianisms, which is also great. So what I wanted to sort of so the main question I wanted to ask here was that how do we systematically study this? Like we can't just be fortunate enough to intern at Microsoft and access a large model's training data. How do we actually systematically build paradigms that can study generalization in language models? So the question here is, for AI, there's clear implications. We'll know how our systems are performing. Why should linguists care potentially? And the interesting thing up here is that these language models are able to sort of master linguistic form. So like linguistic form is different from meaning. So meaning, if you've listened to Alison Ettinger's talks and other folks' talks, there is still a lot of gap in mastery of meaning. We don't even know how to properly test it. But on the subject of linguistic form, I think we can agree that if you've looked at ChatGPT's responses to questions, they're grammatically pretty well formed. And they're able to master the linguistic form by training on well-formed utterances. And so this is linguistically an interesting setting because what this means that they're generalizing only by looking at positive evidence. And the assumption here is that overwhelmingly their training data is mostly positive evidence. I'm sure there are ungrammatical sentences on the internet. But I think the assumption is reasonable to say that it is mostly positive evidence. And this is, to an extent, I'm not saying in terms of content, but to an extent, exactly the nature of input to children. Children overwhelmingly receive positive evidence. They are obviously sometimes corrected by their parents if they say something ungrammatical, but large percent of the time, this is the underlying assumption that linguists operate, at least, that the nature of input to children is positive. So no real negative evidence or any other. But right now, people who want to engage in debates kind of say that this means that this success of these general purpose learners like language models, they're general purpose because they're not training specifically to predict linguistic structure. They're just doing next word prediction. But just this general purpose learning mechanism is able to master linguistic form. People are saying that this in some sense refutes Chomsky in the sense that this means that innate learning mechanisms, which people have said exist for humans, may exist for humans, are not strictly necessary. But this is, to me, this is not a very fully, this is a very not so satisfying claim. This may be true, but the real sort of, I'm not satisfied by this. This seems like a more of a hand-wavy sort of conclusion. And so the question is, I think what would be more interesting, if at all, would be to understand how language models are able to master linguistic form, and if that can be converted into some sort of an explanation, which would be better. Sure.
So linguists are very concerned with the notion of grammaticality, and they typically do that by looking at a sentence and saying whether they, quote, get it or not.
Yeah.
Is there a way to take a language model and have it judge grammaticality as opposed to having it generate?
Yes. Yeah. So there are two sort of dominant ways. I think I have slides on one of them. Let's see. Okay. So this is the paradigm I operate under, which is you present the model. Let's say you're interested in the nature of subject-verb agreement in the model. And so the question here is, you have the subject of the sentence, the keys, then you have some intervening text to the cabinet, and the question is, does the model agree with with the number of the subject? So it should be more likely to say are than is. And since language models are natural next word predictors, you can simply prefix the model with the keys to the cabinet and measure the relative log probability or the probability of are versus is.
Will just compare the probabilities for these two sentences?
Or you could do that. That's almost equivalent. But I guess the on the table succeeding are and is will have some effect, additional effect.
Right. So.
Yeah.
This is not a very important.
Right.
So I think in this context, and the context of the original slide you were on,
Yeah.
So you separated between meaning and form.
Yeah.
But there is something kind of in between, like the color is green ideas thing.
Yes.
Grammatical, but I guess Alison would say infelicitous, maybe.
Yes.
So
that's right.
so where does this fall into it? And in this context, if I say the keys to the cabinet is on the table, that's very less likely. But the sandwiches to the cabinet are on the table, maybe even less likely, even though that's grammatical.
That's a good question. So the point of this example. So my sort of interpretation is that when you're looking at the log probability of the output from a language model, you should not interpret it in isolation. So because the typos could still be high probability. You could say the book on the table, and that would still be high probability. The reason this minimal, so which is why I sort of like using minimal pairs, which isolate the phenomenon you are trying to query, and only under that isolation can you conclude what is happening in the model.
No, but I think that still what you're concluding is just, so you're saying that there's a rule.
Sure. Yeah.
But maybe the problem is the question distinction between a rule and a preference, or do you consider that the same?
So in the context of neural networks, I would tend to not use the word rule, which is they might be inducing that rule or soft rule implicitly. So I would first consider it as a preference as opposed to a rule. And by looking at multiple samples from this, and the strength of the evidence would be how strongly do models prefer is or are versus is. Would I maybe start saying anything about rules in the model? Yeah.
Do you know what the relationship between basically measuring this next token probabilities is versus if you prompt the model and ask it, which of these is more grammatical?
That is exactly the second method. So there we are sort of conflating with the fact that the model knows what grammatical, which is a metalinguistic term. It's a metalinguistic term in the sense that that has some sort of scientific meaning, relatively more scientific meaning than just are versus is, given some prefix. So that's an ongoing debate. People there was a PNAS article about showing the models don't know grammaticality because if you prompt them about grammaticality, they're not very good. And then there was a response, and there was a response to the response arguing for log prob based comparisons. I think this sort of setup is just naturally more intuitive because this is testing the models in their natural environment of next word prediction. So if anything, that the grammaticality type tests might be underestimating models' knowledge, and is also sort of hurt by the fact that it is a metalinguistic query as opposed to this, which is just how do the models respond in their natural environment to pairs of sentences. Cool. So I'll just quickly go back. Right. So the thing about sort of positive evidence is that the models are succeeding on linguistic form just by looking at positive evidence, and potential sort of mechanisms by which they might be doing this, especially on. Yeah,
I'm sorry to drag you back, but I mean, these issues that come up here are bothering me. What would kind of convince me that they have the grammatical evidence is if you could take these probabilities generated by the model and basically build a classifier of whether a sentence is grammatical or not. But the problem is that even if you can answer, even if the model does prefer the whatever was correct there, the is or the are, I can't remember anymore, that doesn't mean that you can build a classifier. I mean, at least I don't see how that you can build a classifier for whether something is grammatical or not, because that means that you might not have any distinction between something is grammatical or not, or just something is like a reasonable sentence. Or you might exclude probably all kinds of completely reasonable sentences, like this laptop is glued to the ceiling or something.
Yeah.
So, in what sense does it really identify the grammar? Like, I mean, in what sense can you really say that it learned the grammar?
Yeah, I think so. That's a good question. So grammaticality, the current assumption is that it's on a continuum. So some things are more grammatical than others. You might see something like typos, for example.
Sure, but the laptop is glued to the ceiling. Presumably, everybody agrees it's completely grammatical.
Sure.
Right?
Yes.
But if I thought I heard that sentence, I might correct it to say, I probably heard the different sentence. Not grammatical, it's more reasonable. So I can come up with an example on the fly.
Sure.
And so there is somehow a difference between just being reasonable and being grammatical.
Yes, which is where the minimal pair sort of paradigm, which is.
But can you? I guess what if you could solve this minimal pair paradigm, does that mean that you can actually use that to classify what's grammatical and what's not?
So usually we just say this is more grammatical than the others because of the graded phenomenon. Yeah. You could, but then there you would be conflating isolated log probabilities. You could maybe build a classifier on the differences, and then say this is how grammatical. Like maybe this is X amount of time more grammatical than the other, but Yeah.
Let's go on.
What was your next slide going to be?
Yeah.
Before this?
That's a good question, guys. We'll find out. So the question is how do things like PIPs and other rare phenomena are able to be learned by these language models? So one hypothesis, even in the context of humans, is that they may be being learned by robustly supported facts about English that are present in the data. We're going to shortly look at what those might look like, and especially not for PIPs, because we're looking at something else in this work. And so the question that the answer to which may provide an actual explanation would be, what do these look like? Are they actually being used during learning? So the question that I'm asking in this talk and in my general research program is, what must be true of a learner's training experience in order for it to generalize? And so as a potential solution, I want to propose this paradigm called controlled rearing, which is essentially taking a corpus of text, training a language model, measuring its targeted behavior, whatever that might be, and then doing the same thing, but then manipulating this corpus in a systematic manner, which is informed by particular hypotheses about what you think must be true, or about questions about you might come up with about what must be true of the learning experience in order for a certain target behavior to emerge. And so you would do this, and then you get analogous sort of behavioral signature of the model, and then compare the two behaviors to conclude about what a learning hypothesis contributes to the target behavior. So I guess this slide seems very familiar to people. What I didn't show was that when GPT-2, which is a very small language model compared to whatever we have these days, is pretty reasonable on this. It gets 86.4% accuracy, which is computed basically how often was the correct continuation chosen over the incorrect one. So no, you could build a classifier on top of that, but you could also just count the proportion of times the relatively more acceptable sentence was chosen in terms of probabilities. So as a case study to sort of go over how we are going to apply controlled rating is on learning of rare linguistic phenomena, one example of which I gave in the start of the talk, but in this case we're going to be looking at this interesting thing. These all tend to have acronym names called the AANNs. And so this was work I did during my postdoc with Kyle at UT Austin. So what is the ANN? It is the article, adjective, numeral, noun construction. So an example of this is a beautiful 5 days. And this is interesting because when you say the article a or a, it is often sort of used for denoting singularity. So a ball, a bat, a box, our class. But here what is happening is that it is being used to describe something that is inherently plural. You're describing 5 days, which is a plural noun phrase, and you're using the word a to describe it. Another thing that is interesting is that this order is a little odd. Beautiful five is a little odd because you would rather just say 5 beautiful days, which is much more frequent. In fact, statistically, if you count the number of times numerals precede adjectives, that is about twice as greater than the number of times adjectives precede numerals. And so these interesting sort of statistical facts make this construction, it has caught the eyes of many linguists about what is so special and what is happening in this construction.
So it's this 5 days is an entity here, right? Just
Yes.
like if I go to 4 seasons, that's also an entity, but that's just named entity.
Yeah.
But this is something like that, no?
There's some relation there. So one thing which we will find eventually is that 5 days are being construed as a singular entity, and so this only works if that is possible. And so we'll see in cases where this might not be possible in future slides. Right. So cool. So while we can't really estimate how often ANNs occur in a human's experience, we can do this for a model. And so what we did was we took a corpus, and we specifically sort of restricted ourselves to a corpus that is tractable, obviously, because we want to go and count things in it. And so what we did was we used the baby LM corpus, which was built using child-directed speech, so transcripts from caregiver to child conversations, children's books, simple Wikipedia. I do not want to claim that content-wise it is developmentally possible, but in terms of amount, it is just 100 million tokens, which is an upper bound to what a 10 to 12-year-old native English speaker might receive as language input. Again, an estimate, so that might vary quite a bit. And so what it has is 11.5 million utterances, which makes it easy to manipulate, hopefully. And so we went in and wrote a complicated regex over part-of-speech tags, and we found only 2,448 AANNs, which is even rare compared to the PIPs, which was estimated at 0.03%. And we did an extensive recall analysis in the paper about are we actually capturing all AANNs and how can we guarantee that by using tons of annotation. So, and then what we did was we trained a language model very similar to the GPT model, but more recent at the time. And so it has 100 million parameters, extremely tiny compared to all the fancy tools these days. And so the question is, how do we actually test knowledge of ANNs? And so Kyle already had a paper on this, and where he created a lot of ANN-containing sentences and collected human judgments of acceptability on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being more acceptable. And so we used 7 as a threshold for good ANNs, but more importantly, we ensured that none of these ANNs actually occurred in the training corpus. So when we eventually test models, we are testing on stimuli that the models have not jointly seen. And so this ends up being about 2K final ANNs. So what do these tests look like? So we have a well-formed ANN, a whopping 90 language models, which is slightly less than the amount of language models we trained in this paper. And then we have a couple of corruptions. So we have the more canonical order, but still ungrammatical, a 90 whopping LMs. You would probably never say that. A whopping, omitting the article, whopping 90 LMs, that also sounds odd. A 90 LMs, which is also bad, and a whopping LMs, which is equally bad, perhaps. What this also has is that it has some good, well-formed, semantically well-formed and astonishing 5 Rs, a meager 3 cents, but also semantically odd, like a blue 6 pencils and a tall 4 chairs. Like, what is happening there? You wouldn't, native speakers do not like a blue 6 pencils or a tall 4 chairs, and theoretically, this is because things like blue and tall are what is called a stubbornly distributive, which means they cannot be used to refer to, when they refer to groups, they refer to individual items. So you would just say 4 tall chairs or 6 blue pencils instead.
So these are marked in you have this label test set, so
Yes.
these are marked as bad?
Well, we don't mark it, we just collected human judgments and
No, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so human judgments in these would be like low numbers.
yeah, and we'll see a plot where we compare the language models and humans about their relative judgments. Yeah. So, and then how do we actually measure performance? So we have this metric called SLOR, which was, for traditional purposes, it means syntactic log odds ratio. I have purposely omitted that because there is nothing syntactic about it. It was originally used to measure syntactic likelihood, which we are doing, but you might as well just use it for semantics as well. So what this is we prefix the language models with some sentence context that researchers trained, and then the interest, the target of the construction we're targeting is C. And so this is just the log probability of the construction given some prefix and normalized by the sentence length. And more importantly, we divide it by the joint probability under a unigram model. And this is important because, as I described, control rating is where we manipulate the corpus and we remove or manipulate or add instances. So by doing these kinds of manipulations, we inflate the unigram, we inflate the word frequencies. So when you compare 2 language models trained on differing corpora, this difference is important. And so we sort of account for that by just dividing by the probability, the unigram probability of the target words. So the way we sorry, question. Yeah.
Just to clarify, so by unigram probability, do you mean the probability in the training set, or do you mean the probability according to the model?
No, the training set, yeah. So this is literally just counts. So this would be count of A times count of whopping times count of 90 times count of LMs.
So it's a model that uniformly pulls out the words according to their frequency.
Yes. Yeah.
Without looking at the previous word.
Yeah, no context-free word frequencies only. So we did try. There's no reason to not try bigram and 4gram and 5gram and keep doing that. The results were not really different, and training a lot of the more n you train, the larger the memory is. So we stuck with the unigrams. And so the way we measure accuracy here is that we look at this metric for our target, the well-formed instance, and we count the number of times it is greater than all badly formed examples. So at the same time, it should be greater than all four. Yes, questions?
Maybe I missed this about your corruptions. One thing is, what's wrong about whopping 90 LMs? Is it just marked poorly by the people judging the corruptions, or there's something grammatically?
Both. They're whopping 90 LMs. I mean, there's no grammatical sort of prediction about what is wrong with that. But humans just tend to just prefer it consistently over a whopping 90 LMs.
So here you're not accounting for the 1 to 10 score. You just want this to be greater than the corruption.
Yeah. So we only right. So we only filtered the 1 to 10 score for the well-formed case. So these we did collect. Human judgments were collected, but we only selected ANNs that were well-formed in the final test set. Because if you want to look at generalization, we only want to do it on well-formed cases. Because testing on badly formed cases will not tell us about the specific, like what enables generalization on good instances of that.
But just to clarify, the fact that you're putting a whooping 90 LMs on the left and all the others on the right here, that doesn't come from human preferences. That comes from your knowledge of grammar.
Yes.
Okay.
So because this is a four-way pairwise comparison, chance performance is 6.25%. And so now we're ready to look at experiments. My watch has lost its battery, and what the time is? Okay, 30 minutes left. Okay, experiment 1 is just testing, just baseline, how do models actually perform on ANNs. And so here what we do is we take the full corpus, train a model, look at behavior, and then what we do is we remove every single instance, all the 2.4K instances of ANNs, train another similarly same architecture model, keeping the tokenizer the same, and then compare behavior. So this would tell us how well does a model sort of perform on this rare phenomenon without having seen it. So in this plot, I will show you, so the x-axis has the ANN training condition, which means it is unablated. We don't do anything to the corpus. And then the no ANN condition is when we do manipulate the corpus and remove the ANNs. And so the accuracy is computed over 3 language model runs over each of this corpus, and the chance performance is 6.25%. And just as a skyline, just for curiosity, we wanted to look at off-the-shelf language models, how well they do. And then we have a 2 and 4 gram baseline. They're absolutely miserable on this test set because they're only tracking 4 gram likelihoods, and that doesn't. They're just bad. And so a model that has seen ANNs, that however rare they are, is very close to GPT-2, Llama 2 7B. Is well above chance. It's at 0.75% accuracy. And the moment we take out ANNs, we still see above chance performance, but there is degradation, but it's still above chance, suggesting that there are some other forces at play in the model and the training corpus that is sort of consistently preferring the ANN over other variants. And so the question was, okay, what about things like a blue 5 pencils? So we have 3 ways of looking at it. We have a whopping 20 pianists, where we take sort of human nouns and we have quantitative, so adjectives that are quantitative in nature, whopping, qualitative and uninviting 3 pianists, the stubbornly distributive case, a large 5 pianists, and on the x-axis we have normalized ratings and the language model scores. So what we see is that humans love quantitative relative to others, love quantitative, are so on qualitative, and do not like stubbornly distributive cases.
Wait, sorry. What's the human task here? What are the humans asked to do?
Just rate linguistic acceptability. How acceptable are these patterns?
Exactly, not to distinguish between. This is not the distinction.
In isolation, yeah. And models, this is just slower. This has nothing to do with the ungrammatical variance. This is just raw, slower, which is like correlated with the log probabilities. And models, regardless of whether ANNs were there or not, seem to show analogous patterns where they too liked the quantitative ones, then the qualitative, and then the stubbornly distributive, suggesting that there's some evidence that is telling them that maybe stubbornly distributive cases are not as likely as the others.
So I don't understand. What are you asking the model to do? Is the model now providing the rating also in addition to?
No. So
what is the rating coming from?
The ratings are coming from humans.
So the ratings are always coming from humans.
Yes, always. And then similarly, we have the analogous to ratings is just the isolated slur values from models.
So what's the triangles then?
The triangles are humans.
So where's the slur coming from?
Slurs are coming from models. So this is
I don't
the.
understand what's an x-axis then.
There are two different things on x-axis. You just brings them to
Oh,
the
it's
same
I thought it's
scale.
rating.
They're
over
both
slurs.
z-scored. So
Okay.
because we wanted to compare them in level
I see,
ground.
I see. So then you have two different. Okay, I thought you were looking at some ratio. I didn't.
No. Sorry. I should have
Okay,
clarified.
that makes more sense. So you're comparing ratings, but you're correlating the ratings by humans and
Yes.
this looks.
Yep. Just qualitatively.
Good, I understand.
Yep. Cool. So this is just sort of an added result. This does not speak to form necessarily. This is more of a meaning query, and it's still a mystery about what is special about stubbornly distributed adjectives. So we won't see further analysis of this, but this is ongoing work that we're interested in understanding about why certain adjectives are bad. So just to drive the point home about what is special about the ANN, what we did was we also replaced ANNs with a counterfactual version of the construction. So we replaced ANNs with nouns, which is 5 beautiful A days, completely weird, never, you would probably hate it, type of pattern. And what we did was we corrupted the corpus and then saw how well the models learned nouns versus ANNs. This is an interesting finding because we'll see soon. So what we did was we actually had 2 different counterfactual versions. The anans, which is simply just swapping the whopping and 90, keeping everything else the same, and the nouns, which I just described. And what we did was we made analogous corruptions in the same way. So in the order swap, we will recover the ANNs for the nouns, and we'll have an equally weird for nouns. And then we measured accuracy in the exact same way as we did before. So now we have a very similar looking plot. Now we test on ANNs when the model sees different conditions, analogous tests on anans when the model sees different conditions, and analogous tests on nouns with the different conditions. As you might predict, the models that don't see this counterfactual version, so ANN and no ANN, all of these are 0. Because they have not seen that version, so there is no reason to believe that they will be good at. So this is sort of a sanity check. So when the models do see anans, they do show above chance performance, suggesting that there's some role that looking at a pattern must play in, which is also, again, not totally out of left field for the models. Like when they see the construction, they are able to perform quite well on it. But the relevant thing here is that in this case, they have still not seen the ANNs, and similarly, when they see nouns, they're also pretty good at the nouns. Yeah.
So confirm the accuracy is the accuracy of predicting preference out of form.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Analogous test, but yeah, with the same permutations. Yep. Same corruptions. So we did not test. I mean, we did test seeing nons, but test on ANNs, but we also tested analogously. So these two, results suggest that the models are learning what they're trained to do quite well above chance. But what is interesting is that when they see nons, they still like ANNs. They still prefer they show above chance performance on the ANNs, even though they have never seen it. And in fact, on top of that, they've seen a counterfactual version of it. So I'll just explain the green triangle here, and you can extrapolate for nons. So in this case, every time the model were to see an ANN, it now sees a non. But then when you test it on the rules of the ANN, it still prefers the grammatically correct version.
So you're saying so the corruptions really are the same? It's not like, a corruption of a non is a non.
Yeah.
All the corruptions are the same across all four. Right?
They're analogous. So when we say we're swapping the order, we do swap the order for
Okay.
whatever they are.
Do you think that you succeeded?
based on index.
So you find this using matching some regular expression or something
Sure.
like
Yeah,
that. Do you think you succeed in actually catching all the ANNs?
Yeah, we did an extensive recall analysis that we have in the paper. We had multiple rounds where we started with a very permissive regex, made it more constrained, did recall, it was low, then made it more constrained, and then finally when the recall was above 99%, about 99 to 100%, we stopped.
And then, so why is the things performing below chance?
Because the chance is synthetically derived about how often one thing is better than four things simultaneously.
So basically saying that ANN is never better than others. I mean, why would
Sorry?
The chance is computed assuming equal priors, but the
Yes.
priors are probably not equal. So the chance might actually be lower.
no? Why?
Yeah, this is a synthetic chance performance because it's difficult to come up with a prior informed chance.
The idea is that chance is for a very, very unbiased model, but the point is that this model really is biased.
Right. So you are actually really, you're really not. Yeah. So I guess that's fine. I have to think about it.
I'm happy to talk more about the motivations behind the chance. It was just derived based on pairwise comparison.
No, that's good. I mean, basically what it's saying is that it's kind of news. You're saying unless you really trick the model in a very particular way, it just is never going to tell me that AN is the right thing.
Yep.
Which is good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is what we expect, and this is equally interesting because
Okay.
having never seen ANNs and having seen counterfactual versions, it is still quite good.
Kanishka?
Yeah.
Sorry, I missed something about the train condition. So, let's say you're looking at the case where the model has not seen ANN but has seen a none,
Yes.
which is kind of a permutation of the same phrase. What is the score it would see in that case? In the training condition, you also see these human assigned scores or labels, right? On a scale of 1 to 10?
The training does not happen with any human.
Oh, these are just
intervention.
just from the data.
There's a self-supervised training on the corpus, and the model sees none.
So it's just thinking of these counterfactual patterns as frequent in the data, but still doesn't think.
Yes. It has evidence for these counterfactual versions, but still prefers ANNs. Okay. Cool. Is it okay if I move ahead, just for a? Cool. Thank you. All right. So the quick takeaways from this is that language models learn about the ANN even without encountering a single instance, which we did verify with a lot of recall analysis, more strongly than they learn its counterfactual variants. In a way that extends to lexical semantic constraints. And so the takeaway from this experiment is that they could be relying on indirect evidence in the training data that might contribute to learning of this construction. So the next natural follow-up question to this is that what do these things look like? What is the key to learning ANNs? So in this case, we did, again, more controlled rearing, where we not only removed ANN, but we removed other cases where linguistically related patterns were being observed. So what is happening in the ANN, as we just discussed, was that 5 days are being construed as a singular unit. The other way of indicating singularity is the is verb. So when you say things like, 5 minutes is all I need for this task, that is the only thing that has something to do with the ANN is that you're using a plural noun phrase, a few weeks, and you're using the word is associated with it. So what happens when we remove that along with the ANNs?
Is few considered a number in here? Like a beautiful few days, is that an ANN?
In
A beautiful few days, is that an ANN? Is few a number?
You could construe it as having
Just
similar properties.
In your experiments, like did you consider that a
Yes, because there are some linguistic
Okay,
reasons. Yeah, we
so
did.
few is a number, basically. Okay,
Yes,
fine.
yes, is a number.
So this is
Right. So if you remove a few weeks is all I need. The question is what happens. So in particular, we looked at 4 different hypotheses. The usual $40, which is just any determiner. So the models could just be using analogy to say, okay, if the works, then could also work, because I can just, if you say the ball, you can also say a ball. That is not a surprising analogy. Then there are sort of indefinite articles like a with plural nouns, so a few plums that do not necessarily contain an adjective. Then there are these measure noun phrases like 6 months, 5 minutes, few days, 5 miles is a long time, where you're treating them as a singular unit. And there's a very kind of ruthless frequency balancing where we slashed any occurrence where we made sure that the probability of the a or the an following an adjective is the same as the probability of that following a number, or preceding a number. And what you could see is that all of these conditions are way more frequent than the ANN. And then just to make sure that we're not just simply sort of looking for sort of confirmation bias and just the results should not be explained by data loss, we also removed just random non-hypotheses conforming sentences. So these were sentences that do not follow in either of these patterns, but were still just removed randomly. And so now what we have is we have a baseline, a 4-gram language model, which is the largest we could train because these models, turns out, take time to train and take a lot of space. And so these were trained with the same tokenizer and the same training data. And so what we have on the x-axis is the average slower across 3 language model runs. And we see that our language models, these are familiar values. These are exactly the values from when they see the ANN, when they don't see the ANN. What we see is that the 4-gram baselines just do not react too much. They have some sort of, regardless of whether they have seen the ANNs or not, they're roughly similar. The only manipulation that does affect them is this frequency balance, which is sort of expected because you're literally slashing so much data that they're just not likely to use it as much. Now for our language models, so when you manipulate any determiner, so the beautiful 5 days, these beautiful 5 days, etc. Performance, so when the models don't see the ANN, it's sort of roughly the same as when the models just did not see only the ANNs. So that ablation on top of ANNs just does not affect the model as much. But the moment you start removing more linguistically related occurrences, the performance starts dropping drastically. So specifically, all these three cases are have some sort of inherent connection with the ANN, and when you pull them out of the corpus and then train a language model, the models just do not find ANNs as likely as before. And just to make sure our sanity check control worked, randomly removing slashing data did not affect performance as much as did this linguistically related cases. So this is sort of some signal that when you remove linguistically related occurrences from the language model for this construction, performance on the construction drops. So the takeaway from here is that the models are able to show this novel phenomenon because here we're testing on unseen ANNs, we're removing ANNs, so this phenomenon to the model is completely novel. And when you remove these related and frequent phenomena, performance drops drastically. So just as an intuitive explanation, the ANN can be learned by observing other instances of measure noun phrases with plural nouns when they're being treated as a singular unit. And so this observation, as you saw with the comparison to the 4-gram baselines, this cannot be explained simply by data loss. Randomly removing utterances did not affect performance, and also cannot be explained by simpler n-gram patterns. So there is something in the language model that is sensitive to the linguistic relation of these various related constructions. So I have another experiment, but I'll skip it because I don't think I have enough time. I do want to take more questions. The general finding of this experiment was that when the model saw ANNs like a mere 5 miles, a beautiful 5 days, and only those kinds of consistently observed I'll just explain the adjective slot here. So when you consistently show the model only beautiful and mere and few in the adjective slot, as opposed to lots of variance, the performance was not that great. But when it saw more variability in the adjective slot, so if you could use a colossal and astonishing, or actually this is a better example. Yeah, so if you continuously showed an additional good versus a colossal, accumulative, balmy, dawdling, glorified, more variance, high variability on the adjective slot, models actually performed comparatively better. So which the takeaway here is that the models, when they encounter this productivity of the slot, when they see variance in the slot, they are able to generalize better. And so this has plenty of connections with the cognitive science of human inference. So people have shown this in morphology, in construction learning itself for a different construction, and in category-based inference, which I'm happy to talk later. So I'll just end with the implications. So by definition, simply by their definitions, they are reliant on training data, and I don't think anyone disagrees there. But this sensitivity may not necessarily be an issue. And we have this exciting opportunity to take training data and characterize it by linking input to the model to its output behavior in a nuanced manner, which is very relevant for linguistic theorizing. And so there is evidence of non-OR memorization. They can regurgitate training data as is, but they can also produce novel sequences. And then we also saw in some evidence of generalizing from indirect positive evidence, so not just direct positive evidence. When they saw ANNs, they performed very well, but when they did not see it, there was some indirect evidence that we were able to find for the ANN. And so I'm just excited to sort of dive deeper into this, understanding what is it in the models that allows them to leverage indirect evidence, and that would be great to characterize mechanistically, mathematically, looking at their internal representations. That will be awesome. How we would do that is still a mystery, but yeah. And there's lots of future work that I'm doing. I'm just going to skip it, but I'm more than happy to go in detail. Yeah, thank you.
Kanishka, we do have some time for questions.
So what does this say about Chomsky's notion of the language faculty? So I've heard a lot of people say, and I'd like to get your opinion, humans are much more data efficient than language. That suggests that Chomsky could be right when it comes to the amount of data required.
Yes, so one thing I did want to clarify was that we operated under only 100 million tokens. So all of these experiments were done assuming that the amount of data is ecologically, only the amount, not the content, was ecologically valid.
But did it get to a command of English? Did it get to a reasonable understanding of grammaticality with that size data?
So we did experiment on sort of more general benchmarks like BLIM, which is a large collection of grammatical acceptability judgments from humans. And it was definitely above chance, but it's difficult. It's difficult for us to say that it is. Like, how does that exactly compare to humans? I would not be surprised if the models were actually worse than humans, because my personal opinion is that humans are definitely much more efficient. I mean, I don't think there's a lot of debate about data efficiency necessarily, but I think this sort of speaks more to the questions about so people who follow Chomsky often suggest that like the input to the child is often only direct positive evidence, and there's just not enough positive evidence for the child to learn this statistically. And so by showing that a general purpose learner can leverage indirect evidence does not necessarily directly refute Chomsky, but it says that innate learning biases may not be strictly necessary for generalizations to emerge. So there is more of an existence proof rather than, oh, this is exactly what humans are doing.
So I'm curious, where I thought you were going with it. I'm curious, so can you ultimately, with all your abolitions, can you create a language model that thinks that this is not a valid grammatical structure, that has, that actually would, for the chance to be lower, would not use it? I don't know how you test that.
So just to understand that question, so you're saying that in a counterfactual scenario where we showed consistently just negative evidence as opposed to badly formed English, or no?
No. In your evolutions, when you change the model, especially just by removing things, not just I'm referring to that last experiment in the main part.
Yeah.
So you said that you removed all kinds of stuff, maybe also messed up some stuff. I think just mostly removed. And then you got, right, so I'm asking about that rectangle on the left, right?
Yes.
So that rectangle on the left, if you're in that area of the rectangle on the left, are you also, what's your performance on the classification problem? And what's your, and does the model actually, I don't know if there's how to measure this, but does the model actually not recognize ANNs as valid anymore? Does it really, does it not use ANNs, or does it reject them, or?
Yeah, good. So analyzing the language models' productions is a bit difficult.
Yeah, I know. So I don't know how
I realize that. To even get them to generate ANNs is difficult.
Is at least.
Yes. So I do have a plot where we did look at accuracies as opposed to slurs, and they show pretty much the same trend. So accuracy.
It's still much above chance.
Yes, it is. It's definitely above chance. So we're not saying we have completely ruined the model's understanding of ANNs. Yes. Yeah.
So there's still other signals.
There might still be. Yeah. These are just these two specifically were actually proposed by linguists theoretically. There's similar things happening here, and then we show that there might be also similar things during learning that they might be affecting. Yeah.
So I guess there is a broader question here. Is it even possible to destroy understanding of part of language completely without destroying all of it?
Yes.
At some point to get it to chance, maybe you'd have to remove everything. Is that plausible?
It's a good question. And especially, I'm assuming this is only through data, because you can show it with representations. You can corrupt parts of the model representationally and preserve it. That would be an interesting thing to look at. And maybe we could start with something simpler than the ANN, something more obvious that is not as rare.
I think that so can you use, so here you used existing ideas and then tested them. Can you use this and now somehow try to optimize over, how can you make the minimal distortion to the training data? What is it that you need to remove that would preserve overall understanding but make it think that ANNs are just completely wrong?
Yeah, I mean, that would require exhaustive sort of, I don't know what the search space would look like, because every time you make an ablation, you have to train a model, which takes almost a day.
I was going to ask you a very related thing, which is basically what would you have to do to the training set to get it so it thinks nons are just as likely as ANNs or something?
I think we should have tried. I think we should have tried this, but what we could have done is when we removed these, we also started inserting artificial sentences with nons as opposed to ANNs. And so now evidence that is contributing to ANNs is held out, well, not fully, because clearly the chances, the performance above chance. And every time the model would have expected to see ANNs, it now sees nouns. So maybe performance there is maybe even worse in that condition, but we didn't actually test it, so maybe we should have, yeah.
The other
Alex, question here?
Suppose we live in a parallel world where we just explicitly forbid and allow all other grammatical rules, where you call this hallucination?
So you're asking if in this condition.
Yeah. So if we happen to live in a different world where we just don't like and then we allow everything else, where we call this hallucination, how do you distinguish this from hallucination? In some sense, I'm asking, what do you think is generalization of hallucination?
I see. I guess in one sense, hallucination is just producing. So it's a definition that you're suggesting of hallucination, that just producing anything that's not in the training data, or.
I think hallucination usually refers to meaning, not to form.
Oh, I mean, just formally just producing something that's outside of your.
It's syntactic hallucination, perhaps.
Yes,
Syntactic hallucination.
Let's
Producing something that's
no-
outside of your training.
No way is
distribution.
no idea to distinguish which word we are. We don't provide any example.
Yeah. So I guess it speaks more to the fact that there are other things that just contribute to the ANN, as opposed to the fact that I've never seen ANN and now I'm producing ANN, therefore I'm hallucinating. I think that I don't think that definition really works in this case, because these constructions are not independent. They're things are like constructions often are theorized to be in a network. So when you say things like I gave the ball to him, that is inherently related to I gave him the ball. Both of those are different orders. Okay, same lexical items, but are clearly related.
But it's not, like if I have an English prime language, the English prime is exactly like English, but with one additional simple grammatical rule that ANNs are not allowed.
Yeah.
It's a valid grammar. It's almost as compact as English grammar. And I think what Jan is saying, which I agree,
There are a
is
lot of color cases in
you're
English.
trained in this language, and
Yeah.
you're actually producing things that are wrong.
Yeah, like when I learned English, I kept doing this kind of generalization, and my English teacher told me this is hallucination.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, I guess we can probably not say, because if there is evidence that other things are contributing to ANN, then it's perhaps hallucinations are not bad after all.
Was there another question?
Yeah, that's it.
Last question over there.
If we change all ANNs to say ANNs with the article in the end, and we also replace all the few tuples to few tuples dozens ANNs in the end, do you expect to see the same kind of pattern that even we remove all ANNs, it still produces ANNs?
I see. So the question is, if we made analogous transformations to these related, I'm not sure how that would exactly look like. So let's say you're saying 5 minutes is all I need for this task. What would the analogous minutes 5 is all I need? No, that's valid. I think that we should probably look at that. I mean, I guess there is some, but then what is happening is that there are other occurrences of 5 minutes that are not changed. So we have to change it completely.
Yeah.
And so then there is just no difference, right? Like now 5 is now a noun and minutes is the numeral. If you're changing the whole the idea of numerals and nouns, then now we have 5 as a noun and minutes as a numeral.
Yeah. I suppose it's still interesting, and also you can
for sure.
ANs or any other permutations, and you also try to systematically change all the other analogs, but not exactly the same strict forms of ANs.
I agree. I mean, I agree. That would be interesting to see. As long as that does not mean that we just now have the exact same version and we've just swapped global positions of every noun and every, then it's equivalent in a sense.
I think it also depends on your tokenizer.
Yes. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. I mean, but then on all our experiments, the tokenizers is held constant. That we don't change at all.